The afternoon sky over the Hollywood Hills was painted in soft shades of gray, a rare break from the usually blinding California sun. It was one of those quiet days where the city seemed to take a deep breath and hold it, the air feeling heavy and cool. Down on the streets below, Los Angeles was fighting its usual chaotic battle of traffic and noise. But up here, winding through the narrow, tree-lined roads, everything was peaceful. This was the part of the day Keanu Reeves cherished the most. It wasn't about the red carpets, the bright camera flashes, or the roar of movie theaters. It was just about the pavement beneath his feet and the silence in his ears. Keanu was on his way back home after a long, solitary walk. For most people in his position, a simple walk wasn't so simple. They would need security teams, SUVs with tinted windows, and a carefully planned route to avoid the paparazzi. But Keanu had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. He had a special kind of magic that allowed him to blend into the background. Despite being one of the most famous faces on the planet, today his disguise was simple but effective. He wore a dark navy hoodie that had seen better days, the fabric slightly faded and stretched out at the cuffs. On his legs were a pair of loose-fitting gray trousers, tucked into heavy, scuffed black boots that thudded rhythmically against the asphalt. Topping it all off was a simple black baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. It wasn't a fashion statement. It was a shield. It cast a shadow over his face, hiding the recognizable features that had made him an icon. With his beard grown out a bit scruffy and his shoulders slumped in a relaxed, non-threatening posture, he didn't look like an action hero. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like any other guy in his 50s trying to get some exercise and clear his head. The walk had done him good. He had spent the last hour just letting his mind wander, thinking about everything and nothing at all. He thought about scripts he was reading, lines he was trying to memorize, and the mundane grocery list he needed to tackle later in the week. But mostly, he just enjoyed the feeling of being anonymous. He passed a few neighbors walking their dogs. They offered a polite nod or a small wave, recognizing him as that guy who lives up the road but not stopping to gawk. No one asked for a selfie. No one shouted, "Whoa." At him, it was perfect. It was the closest he could get to feeling like a normal human being. And it was a feeling he guarded fiercely. As he turned the final corner, his house came into view. It sat perched on the hillside, a sturdy, private structure surrounded by tall trees and thick bushes. To Keanu, it wasn't just a building full of expensive furniture and movie memorabilia. It was his sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where he could truly take off the mask and just be. The tall metal gates at the end of the driveway weren't there to keep people out because he felt important. They were there to keep the crazy world outside so he could find some peace inside. He could feel his muscles relaxing more with every step he took closer to those gates. He was thinking about taking off his boots, maybe making a cup of tea, and just sitting on the couch for a while. The simple pleasures were always the best ones. He could see the top of the gate over the hedge now. It looked sturdy and reassuring, just as it always did. He didn't have his phone with him. He rarely did on these walks, and he certainly didn't have his wallet or any ID on him. He didn't think he needed them. It was his house, after all. Why would he need identification to walk into his own kitchen? In his mind, the hardest part of the day was already over. He had navigated the public world without being spotted, and now he was safely on his own turf. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, a scent that always reminded him of home, no matter where he was living. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, which only held a water bottle and a notebook, and prepared to punch in the code or wave at the camera to be let in. He expected the gates to swing open smoothly, welcoming him back into his private bubble. He expected to walk up the driveway, maybe hear the sound of his family inside, and leave the rest of the world behind. But as he got closer to the entrance, something felt slightly different. Usually, the gates opened with a familiar hum as soon as the sensor picked up his approach, or he would catch a glimpse of the regular guard giving a friendly salute. Today, however, things were still. The gates remained firmly closed. Keanu didn't panic yet. He assumed the sensor was lagging, or perhaps the guard was on a break. He picked up his pace a little, eager to get inside and out of the cooling air. He was just a few feet away now, close enough to reach out and touch the cold metal of the fence. He was tired, his legs were aching pleasantly from the exercise, and his mind was already drifting toward what he might eat for dinner. He had no idea that his peaceful sanctuary was about to become the site of a frustrating standoff, and that his own front door was about to become the one place he wasn't allowed to go. All he wanted was to go home, but the universe, it seemed, had a different script for him this afternoon. Keanu stood in front of the large metal gate, his hand hovering over the intercom button. Usually this was the easiest part of the walk. A simple press, a familiar voice saying, "Welcome home," and the heavy machinery would groan into life, opening the path to safety. But today, the machine remained silent. He pressed the button again, holding his finger on it for a second longer. Still, nothing happened. He took a step back and looked up at the camera, tilting his head so his face might be recognizable to whoever was watching the monitors inside the security booth. He waited for the familiar click of the lock disengaging, but the gate stayed shut tight, cold and unyielding. From the other side, he heard the sound of boots crunching on gravel. A figure appeared on the other side of the fence, walking toward the intercom. It wasn't the usual guard who had been working the street for years, the one who knew Keanu's face better than his own family. This was someone new. The man was young, tall, and built like a tank, wearing a uniform that looked freshly pressed. He had the kind of stern expression that suggested he took his job very, very seriously. He held a clipboard in one hand and a radio in the other, looking like he was ready for a tactical invasion rather than a Tuesday. Afternoon in the suburbs, Keanu leaned toward the small speaker grill on the gate. "Hey," he said, his voice low and raspy. "It's me. Can you open up?" There was a pause. The guard looked at the intercom, then looked through the bars of the gate at the man standing on the other side. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked. From his perspective, standing there was a random man in a dirty hoodie, a scuffed cap, and an old backpack. To the guard, this wasn't a movie star. This was a potential intruder, a homeless person, or maybe a crazy fan trying to sneak in. "Sir, this is private property," the guard's voice crackled through the speaker, loud and authoritative. "You need to move along." Keanu blinked, a little taken aback. He pulled his cap down a bit and leaned in closer. "I know," he said, trying to keep his tone friendly. "I live here. I'm just coming back from a walk." The guard didn't budge. He squinted his eyes, looking Keanu up and down. He was clearly assessing the threat level. He saw the scruffy beard, the worn-out clothes, and the tired posture. It didn't compute. The guard had likely been shown photos of the homeowner. But those photos were usually from red carpets or magazines, clean-shaven, wearing suits, looking polished. The guy in the hoodie didn't match the picture in his head. "If you live here, you know the procedure," the guard said, his voice hardening. "Step back from the gate and state your business, or I will have to escort you off the premises." Keanu let out a small, frustrated sigh. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the awkwardness of the situation creep up on him. He didn't want to pull the "do you know who I am?" card. He hated doing that. It felt arrogant and rude, but he was standing in his own driveway, tired and cold, and he just wanted to go inside. "Look," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. "I don't have my ID on me. I'm just going for a walk. My name is Keanu. I live in the house right there." He pointed up the long driveway toward the main house, barely visible through the trees. The guard looked at the house, then back at Keanu. He didn't look convinced. In his line of work, people lied constantly. Fans would say anything to get close to a celebrity. Thieves would make up any story to get past the first line of defense. He wasn't about to risk his job or his client's safety by opening a heavy security gate for a guy who claimed to be the homeowner, but looked like he had just slept under a bridge. "Sir, I cannot verify your identity," the guard said, crossing his arms over his chest. "If you do not have identification, I cannot let you in. You need to leave the immediate area." Now Keanu was starting to feel a flicker of annoyance. It wasn't anger, just a deep sense of absurdity. He was the king of this castle, technically speaking. Yet here he was being scolded by a guy he had probably hired indirectly through a security company. He realized how ridiculous he must look. If someone told him this story later, he would laugh, but right now, standing in the cool wind, it was just aggravating. "I'm not leaving," Keanu said, planting his feet a little firmer. "This is my home. Just call the house. Ask whoever is inside. Or call my manager. But please, just open the gate." The guard shook his head. "I am not making any calls based on a request from an unidentified civilian on the street. That is against protocol. Please step away." The two men stood there, separated by the iron bars of the gate. It was a standoff. On one side, a man doing his job, protecting a house from a stranger. On the other side, the owner of the house, trapped in his own street by a well-meaning but stubborn employee. Keanu looked at the guard's young, determined face and realized that arguing wasn't going to work. Logic wasn't going to work. The guard was a wall, and unfortunately, the actual gate was a wall too. Keanu took a step back and ran a hand through his hair, which was messy from the wind. He looked around, hoping a neighbor would drive by and vouch for him, but the street was empty. He felt a bit like a character in one of his own movies. Locked out of the safe zone, while the danger, or in this case, the inconvenience, closed in. He had been in situations where he had to talk his way out of trouble. But usually, those involved bad guys with guns. Not security guards with clipboards. "I'm not going to hurt anyone." Keanu tried one last time, his voice softening. "I just want to go inside. I'm tired." The guard's expression softened a fraction, maybe detecting the genuine exhaustion in Keanu's voice. But he didn't move his hand from the radio. "I understand you are tired, sir, but I have my orders. No ID, no entry. Please, for your own safety, move back." Keanu stood there for a long moment, looking at the trees swaying in the wind above the gate. He could see the roof of his house peeking out over the hill. It was so close, yet impossibly far away. He thought about climbing the fence, stalling himself over and running up the driveway. But that would probably just end with him getting tackled, or the police getting called. That would make a great headline. "Action hero arrested for trespassing at her own home." He didn't need that kind of drama. He shoved his hands deep into the pockets of his hoodie and hunched his shoulders against the wind. He was stuck. The silence of the neighborhood suddenly felt louder, pressing in on him. He was just a man in a hoodie standing on the wrong side of the door, waiting for someone to realize that the stranger on the sidewalk was actually the master of the house. And while he stood there, waiting for the world to make sense again, things inside the house were beginning to unravel in a way he couldn't see, but could almost feel in his gut. While the standoff was brewing at the gate, the atmosphere inside the house was the complete opposite of the tension gathering outside. The interior was bathed in warm, golden light, smelling faintly of coffee and the sweet vanilla scent of a candle that had been burning earlier in the day. It was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft padding of small feet running across the expensive wooden floors. Keanu's young daughter was in the living room, busy in her own little world. She was at that age where imagination was everything, and the sprawling house was her castle. She had been playing with her toys, building a tall tower out of colorful blocks, carefully balancing each piece. But like any child, her attention span was short, and soon the urge to look out the window took over. She loved the big windows. They were like giant movie screens that showed her the world outside, a world she was usually shielded from. She climbed onto the plush window seat, pressing her nose and hands against the cool glass. From this high vantage point, she could see the long, winding driveway, the manicured hedges, and all the way down to the heavy iron gate that separated their sanctuary from the rest of the world. Usually, the gate was just a static part of the scenery, but today, something caught her eye. There was movement down there. She squinted, wiping a smudge off the glass with her sleeve to see better. She saw a familiar figure standing on the other side of the bars. It was a man in a hoodie, the one she saw every day. It was her daddy. Her face lit up instantly. She recognized the slump of his shoulders and the way he stood with his hands in his pockets. She knew that walk. She knew that silhouette better than anyone else in the world. But then her little brow furrowed in confusion. Why wasn't the gate opening? It always opened for him. She watched as he pressed the button, waiting for the loud mechanical hum that usually signaled his return. But the gate didn't move. It stayed shut, stubborn and still. Then she saw the other person. A man in a uniform stepped out, blocking her view of her father. To an adult, it would look like a standard security procedure. To a child, it looked much different. From her perspective, high up in the house, the scene was terrifying. She saw a strange man standing in front of her daddy. She saw the guard shaking his head. She saw her daddy gesturing with his hands, looking upset, and the stranger standing firm, refusing to let him through. Her young mind couldn't grasp the concept of a new security guard or ID verification. Her mind worked on a much simpler, more primal level. The narrative forming in her head was one of danger. A stranger was keeping Daddy out. He wasn't letting him come home. The fear bubbled up in her chest, hot and sharp. She wasn't thinking about protocol. She was thinking that her father was being kept away from her. To her, the gate wasn't there to protect them. It was a cage that was trapping him outside. She jumped down from the window seat, her heart starting to pound against her ribs. "Daddy!" She shouted, even though she knew he couldn't hear her through the thick glass in the distance. She ran back to the window, panic starting to set in. She watched as Keanu took a step back, looking defeated, and the guard took a step forward, looking stern. It looked like a confrontation. It looked like a fight was about to start. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her cheeks instantly. She didn't cry softly. She let out a wail of pure distress that echoed through the silent house. It was the sound of a child who feels unsafe, a sound that cuts through everything. She pressed her whole body against the glass again, screaming now, her voice muffled but full of desperation.
"Let him in."
"Let him in." She screamed, her small fists pounding against the window pane. She didn't understand why nobody was helping him. Why was the bad man stopping him? Why couldn't he just walk through the gate like he always did? The image of her father, usually so strong and capable, looking helpless on the other side of the wall, was too much for her to handle. The sheer panic in her voice was like a siren. It wasn't just a tantrum. It was visceral fear. She began to hyperventilate, sobbing uncontrollably, sliding down the wall to the floor as her legs gave out. In her mind, her daddy was gone, taken away by the man at the gate. She felt small and powerless, and the safety of the house had vanished, replaced by the terrifying reality that she couldn't protect her father, and he couldn't get to her. Upstairs, the sound of her crying shattered the peace instantly. It was a noise that no parent ever wants to hear, the specific sound of true terror. Keanu's partner, who had been in another room, dropped what she was doing immediately. The fear in the child's voice was palpable, vibrating through the floorboards. She rushed down the hallway, her heart racing, thoughts racing through her mind. Had she fallen? Was she hurt? Was someone inside? She burst into the living room, her eyes scanning the room for danger. But the room was empty, except for the little girl crumpled on the floor near the window, screaming and crying, pointing a shaking finger toward the glass. The partner ran to her, dropping to her knees to gather the sobbing child into her arms. "What is it? What happened?" she asked, trying to keep her own voice calm while panic tried to creep in. She pulled the child's face away from her chest to look at her. The little girl was gasping for air, her face red and wet with tears.
"Daddy?"
She choked out, her voice breaking. "Daddy, the man. He won't let him in. He's stuck. He's stuck." The partner frowned, confused. She gently turned the child toward the window, following her pointing finger. She looked down the long driveway, past the trees and the hedges, all the way to the gate. At first, it was just a blur of distance. But as she focused, the scene snapped into sharp relief. She saw the guard, rigid and serious, standing his ground. And she saw Keanu standing on the other side of the fence, looking tired and frustrated, gesturing hopelessly at the unyielding metal bars. The realization hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't an intruder. It wasn't a medical emergency. It was a misunderstanding of epic proportions. The new guard, the one who had been introduced just yesterday, clearly didn't recognize Keanu in his off-duty clothes. He was doing his job perhaps a little too well, and in doing so, he had locked the owner of the house out. But more importantly, he had terrified their daughter, who was now watching her father be exiled from his own home. The partner felt a mix of anger and relief wash over her. Relief that there was no immediate danger, but a sharp, hot anger at the situation. She looked down at her daughter, who was still shaking uncontrollably, convinced that her father was being banished forever. It was heartbreaking. The innocence of the child's perspective turned a bureaucratic mix-up into a tragedy. She held the girl tighter, rocking her back and forth, trying to soothe the panic while her own mind raced to figure out how to fix it. "Psst. It's okay," she whispered, though she knew it wasn't okay yet. She looked back out the window. Keanu was just standing there, likely unaware of the melting down happening inside the house. He probably just thought he was dealing with a difficult employee. He didn't know that his little girl was watching, her heart breaking because she thought he was never coming back. The partner knew she had to act fast. She had to get down there, or call someone, or scream out the window. The standoff had to end now. The gate had to open. They couldn't let a simple mistake turn into a traumatic memory for the child. The security was supposed to keep them safe, but today it was doing the exact opposite by keeping their family apart. The partner couldn't stand seeing her daughter like this for another second. The screams were tearing through the room, fueled by a fear that only a child can feel when their safe world suddenly cracks. She knew she had to act fast, but she also needed to be the calm in the middle of the storm. She gently pried the little girl's fingers from her sleeve and knelt down, looking her straight in the eyes. "Daddy is fine," she said, her voice strong and steady, trying to be the anchor her child needed. "I am going to get him right now. I promise. Just watch the window. I will fix it." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and sprinted to the wall panel near the kitchen, the one that connected directly to the security booth at the gate. Her heart was pounding in her chest, a mix of anger at the situation and fear for her daughter. She slammed her finger against the talk button, holding it down hard. "Open the gate." She shouted into the speaker, her voice echoing with authority she rarely had to use. "That is Keanu. Let him in right now." Down at the bottom of the driveway, the silence was shattered by the loud crackle of the guard's radio. The young guard jumped, startled by the sudden noise in his ear. He held the radio up, listening to the frantic voice coming from the main house. It was the partner of the homeowner. She wasn't asking politely. She was ordering him. There was a panic in her voice that scared him more than any intruder could. The guard froze. He looked at the radio, then at the man in the hoodie. The pieces of the puzzle were flying at him all at once. The guy in the dirty clothes was the same guy whose face was on the posters in the security office. The guy who paid the bills. The guy who owned the driveway he was standing on. The blood drained from the guard's face. He felt a cold chill of realization wash over him. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the guard stammered into the radio, his voice suddenly small and shaky. He didn't have ID. He didn't look like... I don't care what he looks like. The voice cut him off, sharp and urgent. "He is coming up the drive. Open it now." The guard felt a wave of hot embarrassment wash over him, starting at his neck and going all the way to his ears. He had made a terrible mistake. He hadn't just stopped a random person. He had detained his own boss. And worse, he could hear the stress in the woman's voice and the faint sounds of crying in the background. He had caused a scene. He had made a little girl cry. He fumbled with the clipboard, nearly dropping it in his haste. His hands trembled as he reached for the manual override switch on the control panel. He couldn't even look at the man standing on the other side of the fence. He just wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. Keanu watched the guard's expression change instantly. The tough, authoritative look melted away, replaced by sheer panic and regret. The guard looked down at his boots, mumbling something into his radio that Keanu couldn't hear. Keanu could see the guard's hand shaking as it hovered over the controls. Then there was a loud clanking sound. Heavy metal grinding against metal, the giant iron gate groaned, breaking its silence. It was the most beautiful sound Keanu had heard all day. The heavy lock disengaged with a loud thunk, and slowly the gates began to swing inward. The barrier was falling. The invisible wall between him and his family was coming down. Keanu let out a long breath he didn't even know he was holding. He adjusted his backpack ready to walk through, but he didn't rush. He kept his eyes on the guard, who was practically shrinking into his uniform. Keanu could see that the young man felt terrible. He could see the regret written all over his face. The guard stepped back, opening his arms in a gesture of surrender and apology. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you. I was following the rules. I thought—" Keanu held up a hand to stop him. He wasn't angry. He was just tired and relieved to be getting in. He could hear the faint sounds of crying still drifting down from the house, even from this distance. That worried him more than the locked gate. He knew that sound. It was his daughter. She was upset, and that was the only thing that mattered to him right now. "It's okay," Keanu said quietly, his voice raspy but kind. "You're doing your job. Just, next time, maybe look a little closer." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't lecture him. He just walked past the open gate, his boots clicking on the pavement of his own driveway. As soon as he was on the inside, the world felt different. The air felt warmer. The tension of the street fell away. But the sound of his daughter crying was getting louder now that he was closer, and it pulled at his heart like a magnet. He looked up at the house. Through the large glass windows, he could see the scene unfolding. He saw his partner rushing back to the window, and he saw his little girl, her face pressed against the glass, looking down. Even from this far away, he could see her body shaking with sobs. It broke his heart. He realized she must have seen the whole thing. She must have thought he was never coming back. Keanu forgot all about the guard. He forgot about the embarrassment and the locked gate. His pace quickened from a walk to a jog. The long driveway had never felt so long before. He needed to get to her. He needed to let her know that the bad man hadn't won, that he was here and that everything was safe. He waved up at the window, hoping she would see him, hoping it would stop the tears. He didn't care that he looked like a mess in his old clothes. He didn't care about the paparazzi potentially hiding in the bushes. He just needed to be a dad right now. The partner saw him coming through the window. She grabbed her daughter by the shoulders and turned her around gently. "Look," she said softly, pointing down. "Look who's coming. See? The gate opened. Daddy is here." The little girl blinked her tears away and looked down. She saw the familiar figure jogging up the driveway. She saw the hoodie. She saw the way he moved. The fear that had gripped her heart began to loosen its hold. He wasn't trapped anymore. He was coming home. Keanu reached the front porch, slightly out of breath. He didn't bother with his keys. He knew the door would be unlocked for him. He threw it open and stepped into the hallway, the smell of home hitting him instantly. But he didn't stop to take off his shoes. He headed straight for the living room, drawn by the sound of his child's voice, ready to fix the broken pieces of the afternoon with a hug. The outside world, with its rules and guards and gates, was locked out. Now, it was just time to be a family again. The heavy front door swung shut behind him, cutting off the cool evening air and locking the chaos of the outside world away. For a second, Keanu just stood in the hallway, his chest heaving slightly from the run up the driveway, listening. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with the leftover energy of the panic that had just taken place. He could hear the soft, sniffling sounds of his daughter trying to catch her breath, a sound that twisted his heart tighter than any movie script ever could. He didn't bother to take off his muddy boots or drop his backpack. He walked straight into the living room, his eyes locking onto the small figure huddled on the couch. She looked so small in the big room, wrapped in a blanket, her face swollen and red from crying. When she saw him, her eyes went wide, as if she couldn't quite believe he was actually real, that he wasn't just a ghost she had imagined through the window. She didn't say a word. She just let out a little whimper and launched herself off the couch, running across the room as fast as her little legs could carry her. Keanu dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor, opening his arms just in time to catch her. She collided with him, burying her face in his chest and wrapping her arms tightly around his neck, holding on as if she never wanted to let go. "I'm here," Keanu whispered into her hair, closing his eyes and breathing her in. She smelled like shampoo and vanilla, a scent that instantly grounded him. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." He held her close, one hand rubbing her back in slow, rhythmic circles. He could feel her tiny heart beating against his ribs, fast and fluttering like a trapped bird, slowly beginning to settle down. He didn't tell her she was silly for crying. He didn't tell her it was just a mistake. To her, the danger had been real. She had watched her daddy get stopped by a stranger, and in that moment, the logic of security protocols didn't exist. There was only fear. "I saw him," she mumbled into his hoodie, her voice muffled and thick with tears. "He wouldn't let you in. I thought you were gone forever." "I know," Keanu said softly, rocking her gently back and forth. "It looked scary, didn't it? But I promise you that man was just confused. He thought he was doing the right thing, but nothing, and I mean nothing, could keep me away from you. Not a gate, not a guard, nothing." He pulled back slightly so he could look her in the face. He wiped a stray tear from her cheek with his rough thumb, giving her a small, tired smile. "See, I'm right here, boots and all." His partner walked over then, sinking down onto the floor beside them. She looked drained, her face pale, but she managed a weak smile as she rested her head on Keanu's shoulder. She reached out and took his free hand, squeezing it tight. They sat there like that for a long time, a little island of 3 people in the middle of the big room. The drama at the gate felt miles away now. The only thing that mattered was the warmth of their hands and the slowing of their breathing. Once the tears had stopped and the little girl's grip on his neck loosened, Keanu knew he had one more thing to do. He couldn't just leave the young guard down at the gate feeling like he had ruined his life. The guard was just a kid doing a job, a kid who was probably terrified right now that he was going to be fired on the spot. "I'll be right back," Keanu promised, kissing his daughter on the forehead. "Go sit with Mom. I need to go say something to our friend at the gate." He stood up, his knees popping slightly, and walked back to the intercom panel near the kitchen. He pressed the button, leaning in close. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Can you hear me?" There was a crackle of static, then a very nervous voice. "Yes, sir. I am so sorry, sir. I really am." "Stop apologizing," Keanu said, cutting him off gently. "You were doing your job. You were protecting my family, and I appreciate that. You didn't recognize me, and that happens. I was wearing a disguise, basically. Just next time, maybe trust your gut a little more if the guy looks really pathetic and tired, okay?" There was a pause, and then the guard let out a nervous laugh. "Yes, sir, I will." "Thank you, sir. Thank you for being so cool about this. We're good," Keanu said. "Just relax tonight. It's over." He released the button and let out a long sigh. The tension in his shoulders finally dropped away. It was easy to get angry, easy to shout at someone for a mistake, but he knew that wouldn't fix anything. The guard would learn, and hopefully, the kid wouldn't be too hard on himself. We all have bad days. We all make mistakes. What mattered was how you handled them after. Keanu walked back into the living room. His daughter was now sitting on the rug, playing with her blocks again, so she kept glancing up to make sure he was still there. His partner was sitting on the couch, watching him with a look of pure love and relief. The sun had finally set completely, and the room was dark except for the warm glow of the lamps. It felt cozy. It felt safe. He sat down on the floor next to his daughter, picking up a red block and handing it to her. She took it with a shy smile, the fear of 10 minutes ago seemingly forgotten, replaced by the simple joy of having her dad back on her level, also his partner said, leaning back into the cushions and stretching her legs out. "How was your walk?" Keanu chuckled, a deep, warm sound that rumbled in his chest. He looked at the closed front door, then at his family. "It was adventurous," he said. "A little too adventurous for a Tuesday? But I think I'm done walking for today. I think I'll just stay right here." The night settled in around them, quiet and peaceful. The gates at the end of the driveway were closed again, standing guard against the world. But inside the walls were down. There was no superstar here, no security guard, no barriers. There was just a father, a mother, and a child, sitting in the soft light of the living room, happy just to be together. The scare had passed, leaving behind only a story they would tell years from now. A reminder of the time the world tried to keep Keanu Reeves out of his own home. and failed simply because a little girl loved her daddy too much to let that happen. It was a real-life happy ending, the kind that doesn't need a script or a director. It just needed a little patience, a lot of love, and an open door.